Welcome to this explainer. When we look back at the origins of the United States, it's super tempting to picture a single unified master plan. It's easy to imagine a group of guys sitting around a map carving out 13 neat little borders. But the reality, it was a messy, totally disconnected puzzle. These 13 colonies absolutely did not start as one cohesive idea. Instead, they grew piece by piece over more than a century, and for wildly different reasons.
Look at this timeline. We start way back in 1607 with Virginia. Then we jump to 1620 with Massachusetts. Fast forward to 1681 with Pennsylvania, and we don't even get to Georgia until 1732. We're talking about a whopping 125-year gap between the founding of Virginia and the founding of Georgia. That completely shatters the myth that these colonies were created all at once. I mean, think about it. Entire generations lived and died in Virginia before Georgia was even a concept. So how did these scattered, staggered settlements ever become a single unit?
To figure out how these puzzle pieces actually fit together, we're going to hit four main areas today. 1, the 3 distinct regions. 2, the vastly different reasons they were founded. 3, what daily life and government actually looked like. And 4, the growing connections and tensions that brought the whole thing together. All right, let's dive right in. Section 1, 3 distinct regions, geography and goals. Let's see how the literal ground they stood on shaped their societies. So, historians generally drop the 13 colonies into 3 distinct buckets based on where they were. Up in New England, the reality there was dictated by rocky soil and a really short growing season. You can't exactly farm on rocks, right? So they turned to the sea. They relied heavily on fishing, shipbuilding, and trade. Moved down to the middle colonies, and those became these amazing hubs of cultural and religious diversity. And down south, the geography there was practically begging for massive farms. So they built huge plantations to grow incredibly lucrative cash crops. It literally goes to show you, the land you live on totally dictates the society you build. Let's zoom in a bit. Up in New England, places like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire were settled by folks who are primarily chasing religious freedom, kind of piggybacking on that early Plymouth model. But shift right next door to the middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and you get a totally different vibe. Instead of being laser-focused on specific religious communities, the middle colonies became famous for this bustling, incredible mix of different cultures and beliefs.
To really understand that diversity, just look at the year 1681. That's when William Penn founded Pennsylvania. And here's the thing, Penn didn't just want a massive plot of land for himself. Historical records show he set up Pennsylvania specifically to be a welcoming haven. It was basically an open door for Quakers and all sorts of other groups who were just looking for some tolerance. That mindset laid the absolute groundwork for the incredible diversity the middle colonies are known for.
Now, heading southward, we run into a totally different economic engine. The Southern Colonies, so Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, and Georgia, were built on massive plantation farms. They were churning out high-demand cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. But, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, that scale of farming required an unbelievable amount of labor. So as we move through the 1600s and 1700s, historians note that this region's economy became increasingly deeply dependent on enslaved labor. It was a brutal reality, but it was absolutely foundational to the Southern economy, and obviously it had massive implications down the road. Moving on to Section 2, different reasons for founding. The creators. Let's talk about the people who actually put these places on the map.
Here's a wild fact. There was absolutely no standard instruction manual for starting a colony. The methods were all over the map. Some were literally corporate business ventures. Take Virginia, for example. It was run by the Virginia Company, which was essentially a 17th century startup looking to make a quick buck. Then, on the flip side, you had settler-organized communities like Massachusetts, where folks grouped together for religious reasons way before the English crown stepped in with closer oversight. And smack in the middle, you had a third, very unique kind of setup. And that's the proprietary colony. Honestly, imagine the King of England just handing over a piece of land the size of a modern European country as a personal gift. No way, right? But that is exactly what happened with places like Maryland or Pennsylvania with William Penn. These proprietors literally owned the colony themselves. So when we talk about the 13 colonies, we aren't just looking at one neat system. We're talking about corporate investments, religious safe havens, and massive private estates, all basically sitting side by side. All right, Section 3, daily life and government, the texture. What was it actually like to live there on the ground?
Well, the political vibe back then was this constant balancing act.
On one hand, each colony spun up its own local government. We're talking elected assemblies like Jamestown's famous House of Burgesses. Now sure, these assemblies generally only represented property-owning men, but it was still a massive first step for local representative government. But on the other hand, you had a governor who was usually handpicked by England. Historians love to point this out, that constant push and pull between local representation and a boss sitting an ocean away. That dynamic heavily influenced the very ideas that would later build the US government.
Outside of politics, everyday life just depended on who you were and where you planted your boots. For the vast majority of colonists, life meant farming. Farming families were absolutely the backbone of the population. But if you were a merchant, your world was the noisy, chaotic streets of port cities like Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, which were exploding into global centers for trade and shipping. And at the same time, for enslaved Africans and their descendants, daily life meant forced labor. That system grew significantly during this time and became a central pillar of the colonial economy, especially down south. Which brings us to our final section, growing connections and tensions, the climax. So it totally begs the question, how did 13 entirely different societies, spanning completely different climates, economies, and religious beliefs, ever actually connect? If they had basically nothing in common on day one, what was the glue that stuck them together as the 1700s rolled on? Well, by the mid-1700s, despite their vast differences, they actually started sharing some pretty major traits. According to the source material, by the time Georgia hit the map in 1732, England controlled this continuous unbroken stretch of coastline all the way from New Hampshire down to Georgia. Geographically, they were finally neighbors. Culturally, they were all living under British rule, speaking a common language and using English legal traditions. And economically, trade between the colonies and with the rest of the world just skyrocketed. The puzzle pieces were finally locking together. But here is the irony. As they got closer to each other, their relationship with the mother country started to seriously crack. As they united, the tension with England just kept ramping up. The big sticking points? You guessed it, taxation and self-governance. The colonists were really used to their local assemblies by now, so when England tried to tighten the leash, those shared frustrations actually acted like a superglue, planting the very seeds of the American Revolution decades before anyone ever fired a musket. Our source material really boils it down to this one perfect thought. The 13 colonies weren't a monolith. They grew over more than 125 years, shaped by business interests, religious movements, royal land grants, and the labor of both free settlers and enslaved people. It wasn't an overnight master plan, it was this incredibly complex, slow-motion collision of totally different worlds. Knowing how wildly different each of these colonies started out totally changes the way you look at history. I mean, if 13 profoundly different societies, with clashing economies and totally different reasons for existing, had to somehow agree to form one single country, is it any wonder early US politics were so incredibly complicated and deeply divided? It really makes you see the founding of the nation in a whole new light. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history you think you know.